All right, so get ready because today we're going to take a deep dive into a life story that's, well, it's both captivating and controversial.
Yeah.
We're talking about Assata Shakur.
A figure who has been both revered and reviled.
Exactly, inspiring fierce loyalty in some and provoking outrage in others.
What's so fascinating about her story is that it really forces us to grapple with some tough questions.
Yeah,
Was she a visionary fighting for justice, or was there something more sinister at play?
a genuine revolutionary.
Yeah, was she skillfully manipulating the system for her own gain?
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces don't quite fit.
Right.
And to try to make sense of it all, we've gathered a whole mountain of sources, court records, biographical information, and even Assata's own words.
Wow.
So we're talking about a woman who's been labeled a cop killer, a folk hero, and everything in between.
And that's what we're here to figure out together, right?
Yeah.
We want to peel back the layers of myth and examine the evidence to see if we can separate fact from fiction.
Absolutely. So
Okay.
let's rewind all the way back to the beginning. Assata Shakur was born Joanne Deborah Byron in 1947 in Queens, New York. But her early life was far from stable.
Yeah, she spent a lot of her childhood moving back and forth between New York and North Carolina.
Right, living with relatives while her mom worked in the city.
And those early experiences, particularly in North Carolina, really shaped her worldview.
Yeah, can you imagine being the only black child in your classroom,
Yeah?
facing the harsh realities of segregation and racism at such a young age?
It's no surprise that those experiences had a profound impact on her
Right.
and fueled her passion for social justice.
It's clear that she was a bright kid,
Mm-hmm.
but formal education wasn't always an easy path for her.
Yeah.
She actually dropped out of high school for a period
Really?
and even spent some time living on the streets.
Wow.
You can wonder how those experiences outside of the classroom
Yeah.
might have shaped her thinking as well.
Absolutely. It's fascinating to consider how both traditional education and lived experience come together to influence someone's outlook. Thankfully, she had a strong support system,
Yeah.
especially her aunt, Evelyn Williams, who encouraged her to get her GED and go to college.
And that's when things really start to get interesting.
Okay.
We're talking Manhattan Community College in the mid-1960s.
Think about the energy and upheaval of that era.
Exactly. She dives headfirst into the world of black studies and the burgeoning civil rights movement.
Wow.
We're talking sit-ins, protests, the whole 9 yards. She was right there on the front lines.
To really grasp the significance of this period in her life, it's important to understand the broader context. This was the era of Black power, with figures like Malcolm X challenging the status quo and demanding equality and justice.
Right.
It was a time of both incredible hope and disillusionment, and Assata was right in the thick of it.
She even married a fellow activist, Louis Chesimard, during this time.
Okay.
But their marriage was short-lived.
Interesting.
It makes you wonder if it was a sign of her independent spirit and unwavering commitment to the cause. Maybe even a reluctance to be tied down by traditional expectations.
That's a really intriguing point, and it's interesting to note that her involvement in the movement deepened.
Oh, really?
She was initially drawn to the Black Panther Party, intrigued by their community programs and revolutionary ideals.
Okay.
She even became a leader in the Harlem chapter,
Wow.
but something shifted.
Okay.
She eventually became disillusioned, feeling that the party's macho behavior and approach to Black American history weren't aligned with her own beliefs.
So she moves on to a more radical group,
Yeah.
the Black Liberation Army, or BLA.
And this is where things get even more complex, right?
Yeah.
The BLA advocated for armed resistance against the U.S. government,
Okay.
taking inspiration from guerrilla groups like the Viet Cong.
Wow.
They saw themselves as engaged in a war against oppression, and their tactics reflected that belief.
So we're talking
Exactly.
bombings, bank robberies,
Yes.
and even allegations of targeting drug dealers and police officers.
The FBI considered the BLA a serious threat, and they became a prime target of COINTELPRO.
That infamous FBI program designed to disrupt Black activist groups.
Remember, this program was known for using some pretty shady tactics,
Yeah.
including infiltration, disinformation, and even outright violence.
And Assata's involvement with the BLA led to a string of arrests for some serious crimes.
Like,
Bank robbery, assault, kidnapping, even attempted murder.
wow, looking at the court records from this period, it's clear that she was living a very dangerous life,
Yeah.
surrounded by violence and constantly in the crosshairs of law enforcement.
But here's where those multiple perspectives we talked about become so crucial.
Okay.
Because through it all, Assata maintained her innocence.
Really?
claiming that she was being targeted and framed by the government, specifically by COINTELPRO.
Wow.
She argued that the evidence against her was fabricated and that she was being harassed and silenced because of her activism.
It really raises the question.
Yeah.
How much of her story is the truth, and how much of it was shaped by the political climate and the FBI's agenda?
So we've got this incredibly charged backdrop, right?
Yeah.
The rise of Black Power, the militancy of the BLA,
Yeah.
and the FBI actively working to undermine Black activists through COINTELPRO.
It's a recipe for suspicion and conflict, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And it's in this volatile atmosphere that the defining event of Assata Shakur's life takes place.
Okay.
It starts on a seemingly ordinary day,
All right.
May 2nd, 1973,
Okay.
on the New Jersey Turnpike.
Mm-hmm.
But it quickly escalates into a deadly shootout that would forever alter the course of her story.
You're talking about the incident where Trooper Werner Forster and Assata Shakur, a fellow BLA member, were killed, and Assata herself was shot twice and seriously injured.
This event is pivotal in her story
Yeah.
because the accounts of what happened that night are wildly conflicting.
And that's what we'll delve into next, because disentangling those narratives, examining the evidence, and trying to piece together what really happened that night is key to understanding the controversy that surrounds Assata Shakur. Welcome back. Last time we left off on kind of a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
That fateful night on the New Jersey Turnpike where everything changed for Assata Shakur.
Right.
So let's try to untangle this web of conflicting narratives surrounding that shootout and see if we can get closer to the truth.
It feels like we're dealing with two completely different versions of reality.
Right.
On one hand, you have the FBI's account, which paints a pretty damning picture of Assata as a dangerous radical who ambushed the state troopers and executed Trooper Forster in cold blood.
And their narrative really hinges on a few key pieces of evidence.
Like what?
They point to ballistic reports that they say link the bullets that killed Forrester to Assata's gun.
Okay.
They highlight eyewitness accounts from other motorists who claim they saw her firing at the officers.
Right.
And of course, they emphasize her involvement with the BLA, suggesting a predisposition towards violence and a willingness to target law enforcement.
But then you have the defense's version of events,
Right.
which is dramatically different.
Yeah, they argue that the physical evidence doesn't actually support the FBI's claims.
Okay.
For example, there was medical evidence suggesting that Assata's injuries were so severe that she couldn't have physically fired a weapon that night.
They also cast doubt on the reliability of the prosecution's key witnesses.
Right.
Two men who had already pleaded guilty to participating in a different robbery.
The defense argued that these witnesses had been pressured or coerced into testifying against Assata in exchange for lighter sentences.
And then there's the whole issue of potential evidence tampering.
Right.
The defense alleged that shell casings had been moved and that a bullet was even planted in Assata's gun to make her appear guilty.
And all of this was happening against the backdrop of COINTELPRO and the FBI's documented efforts to disrupt and discredit Black activist groups. So it's understandable why some people saw Assata's arrest and trial as politically motivated, a way to silence a powerful voice in the movement.
It's a lot to wrap your head around, isn't it?
Yeah, conflicting evidence,
Yeah.
allegations of corruption, and the shadow of COINTELPRO looming over everything.
And to make things even more complicated, Assata herself has always maintained her innocence.
Oh, really?
In her autobiography, she describes the shootout very differently,
Okay.
claiming that Forster was shot in the crossfire and that she was actually trying to surrender when she was shot by the police.
Wow.
She portrays herself as a victim of police brutality caught in a system determined to make an example of her.
So we're left with a classic he said, she said situation. And there's no easy way to know for sure what truly happened that night.
The jury ultimately sided with the prosecution, but the doubts and questions haven't gone away, have they?
No, they haven't. And it's important to consider the context of the trial.
Okay.
The media coverage was intense, and there was a lot of fear and anger surrounding the case. It's not unreasonable to wonder if the jury's decision was influenced by those factors, or even by racial bias, conscious or unconscious.
And then there's the escape,
Yeah.
which feels like something ripped straight out of a Hollywood movie.
Right.
1979, she's in a maximum security prison, and boom, she's gone.
Wow.
Multiple accomplices, a carefully orchestrated plan, even a helicopter whisking her away to freedom.
That's incredible.
It's pretty audacious, wouldn't you say?
It was a stunning turn of events, and it really added fuel to the fire.
Right.
For some, it solidified her image as a revolutionary icon.
Okay.
Someone who refused to be imprisoned by a system she saw as unjust. They saw it as an act of defiance, a blow against the establishment.
But for others, it was just further proof of her guilt,
Right.
confirmation that she was dangerous and needed to be brought to justice.
Exactly. And then she ends up in Cuba, which has long been a safe haven for political exiles from the United States.
Well,
She's granted asylum in 1984, and she's been living there ever since, raising her daughter, pursuing higher education, and continuing to write and speak out against injustice, all while the family of Trooper Forster continues to seek justice for his death.
it's a story that just won't quit.
Mm-hmm.
And it becomes even more complex when you consider the thawing of relations between the U.S. and Cuba that started a few years back.
Mm-hmm.
This sparked a whole new debate, didn't it? Because suddenly the question of whether she should be extradited back to the U.S. was front and center.
Absolutely. Law enforcement officials and politicians were adamant that she should be returned to face justice,
Right.
arguing that Cuba was harboring a dangerous criminal.
But then you had human rights activists and others pushing back,
Right.
saying that she was a political exile, deserving of refuge,
Yeah.
and that extraditing her would be a huge setback for U.S.-Cuba relations.
It really highlights the tension between these competing interests. The pursuit of justice for the victim's family, the complexities of international relations, and the moral questions surrounding political asylum. And it all circles back to the fundamental question we're wrestling with. Who is Assata Shakur? Is she a villain or a victim?
So here we are at the heart of the matter. We've walked through Assata Shakur's life, explored the controversies, and now it's time to try to answer that big question.
Grifter or gifted?
Was she a revolutionary hero, or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface?
And this is where it gets really interesting because there are no easy answers. Her story is so multifaceted,
Right.
so deeply intertwined with the complexities of the fight for social justice that it defies simple categorization.
You can see how she became such a powerful symbol for so many people.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have those who see her as a folk hero, a fearless woman who stood up to a system that had been stacked against her from the start. They point to the undeniable injustices she faced, the questions surrounding the evidence against her, and her unwavering commitment to Black liberation for them. She represents resilience, defiance, and the struggle for equality.
But on the other hand, there are those who see her as a symbol of violence, a reminder of painful past. They focus on the life that was lost, the family left grieving, and the fact that she escaped punishment for a serious crime.
Right.
They see her as a dangerous figure, someone who chose a path of violence and should be held accountable for her actions.
And it's easy to get caught up in those black and white perspectives,
Yeah.
to pick a side and dig in your heels. But this deep dive has really shown us that the truth is far more nuanced than that, hasn't it?
It has, and it raises an important question.
Yeah.
Can we acknowledge the complexities of this case, the validity of these conflicting emotions, without resorting to those simplistic labels? Can we hold space for both the pain of the victim's family and the systemic injustices that fueled the anger and despair of groups like the BLA?
It's a tough question and one that doesn't have a simple answer, but it's exactly the kind of question we need to be asking ourselves if we want to learn from the past and move toward a more just and equitable future.
We've focused a lot on the legal and political aspects of Assata Shakur's story, but it's important to remember that she's also a writer, a poet, a voice that continues to resonate with certain communities, particularly in hip-hop culture.
Her words have been sampled in songs. Her image has been featured on album covers and T-shirts. And her story has been invoked by artists as a symbol of resistance.
Some argue that this glorifies violence.
But is it really that simple?
That's for you to decide. Is it a celebration of violence, or is it a reclaiming of a narrative that has been distorted and demonized by those in power? These are the kinds of questions her story continues to provoke, even decades later.
At the end of the day, this deep dive wasn't just about understanding one woman's life. It was about grappling with those enduring questions about race justice and the fight for equality in America. It's a conversation that we as a society need to keep having.
So as you continue to reflect on Assata Shakur's legacy, remember that there's no one right answer. It's a story that challenges us to think critically, to question our assumptions, and to engage in meaningful dialogue about the complexities of history and the ongoing struggle for social justice.